Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our panelists for your service to the country and in national defense, defense of public safety. Director Wray, always a pleasure to see a fellow Georgian, and thank you for your continued service as well. Each time we've engaged in a setting like this one, I've asked you to assess the drivers of elevated levels of violent crime in Georgia and nationwide. According to FBI data, violent crime did increase from 2020 to 2021. Could you please provide the committee with an updated assessment of what is driving this dynamic?
So there are a lot of things driving the violent crime crisis that is occurring in this country, in Georgia and elsewhere. There are a few things. First, I would say the traditional drivers are all there: drugs, illegal gun trafficking, gangs, socioeconomic factors. So those are all still present. But in addition to that, we are seeing, and I hear this from chiefs and sheriffs all the time, as well as from our own agents, an alarming uptick in the incidence of juveniles engaging in violence, often graduating from carjackings to even worse violence. And that is a real challenge for the legal system because we're not set up to very effectively deal with crimes committed by minors. We are also seeing, not everywhere, but an awful lot of places, we are seeing way too many dangerous offenders getting back out on the streets. And the only thing more frustrating to the hardworking men of law enforcement than having to arrest somebody who should have been behind bars is having to arrest the same person over and over again. And that's a product of any number of things. It could be backlogs, it could be certain prosecution practices, certain kind of bail practices, and of course the juvenile issue that I mentioned. So those are some of the things that are driving it. In Georgia in particular, pretty much every week I feel like our Atlanta field office is engaging in some kind of operation where they're seizing drugs, guns, cash, whether it's meth, whether it's fentanyl. And so they're experiencing a lot of the same things that we're seeing nationally. Certainly neighborhood gangs are a big phenomenon in our home state. We are also seeing, I would add two other things that have a little bit of a Georgia wrinkle to it. One is juveniles who post-COVID have not returned to school, and so that may contribute to the juvenile effect. And we're seeing, violent criminals who are either detained or imprisoned because they're serving a sentence, who still have access to their cellular phones and are able to continue to participate in the activity despite best efforts by the corrections officials to continue to participate in the violent activity. So those are some of the things. And I guess one last one, an alarming phenomenon of switches which convert otherwise lawful weapons into fully automatic, and that, of course, increases the violent potential.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Director Wray. You have a new SAC in that Atlanta office, and welcomed her upon her arrival, wish her and her team the best. What can the FBI continue to do, and what more can you do to help protect communities in Georgia who are fearful that they may face carjacking or mugging or aggravated assault out on the sidewalk or at a shopping mall? What are you doing, and what more can you do? And will you continue to work with local law enforcement in Georgia to crack down on the violent crime that's preying on innocent citizens?
Violent crime is a major, major priority for the FBI. As I think I said in response to an earlier question, I still think it continues to be the place where we have the most single allocation of resources in terms of personnel. We have Safe Streets task forces that focus on sort of the gang violence. We have other kinds of violent crime task forces, all of which allow us to bring together what the FBI has to bear with state and local partners who participate on those task forces. We do active shooter training and things like that to help the community better protect itself. Our lab, close to half of the work that they do from a forensic side is in support of violent crime cases, often for our state and local partners. Senator Scott and I had a conversation about the tip line that we have out in West Virginia, where we prioritize getting threats to life out to state and local partners on the violent crime side. So there's a whole host of things that we're doing, but this remains top of mind for me and for my team. And when I am talking to chiefs and sheriffs, this is always the first topic we talk about and the last topic we talk about, because it's so much on everyone's mind.
Thank you, Director. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us. Could you please assess the most significant threats to port infrastructure in the United States? Of course, we have in Georgia the Port of Savannah. It's the 4th busiest deep water port in the country.
With respect to the infrastructure itself,
Two ports.
two ports, one of the concerns that we have is, of course, the cybersecurity threat to ports. We are increasing the level of technology by which our ports operate, and that is why not only does Customs and Border Protection have a focus on cybersecurity, but so does the United States Coast Guard. So I would identify, with respect to our ports, cybersecurity as a significant threat stream, and we're, of course, very focused on defending against it and strengthening our cybersecurity.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And will you and your staff continue to work with the Georgia Ports Authority, state and local law enforcement in Georgia to help harden the Port of Savannah and other critical port infrastructure in Georgia against that threat and other threats?
We absolutely will, and you know, through the infrastructure bill that has been passed, fortunately, we have tremendous funding to dedicate to not only the improvement of the infrastructure itself, but also its hardening.
I want to close very briefly, Secretary Mayorkas. I thank you for your cooperation in providing to the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations the documents and records that allowed us to conduct an 18-month investigation of medical mistreatment of women in detention. We held that hearing, as you likely know, earlier this week. The bipartisan findings that Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin and I have presented are deeply disturbing and suggest there are major gaps in the vetting and oversight of DHS contracted physicians who treat the detainee population. I ask that you review those findings in detail and that we will have a follow-up engagement to discuss the steps that DHS is taking and needs to take to ensure that the dignity and human rights and constitutional rights of all detainees are upheld.
I look forward to doing so, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.